Thank you for joining us at Community on Demand. Today, Pastor Dan continues his sermon series called The Top 10 Songs in the Bible. Our American culture is in a crisis due to losers posing as leaders and leaders pausing in their leadership responsibilities. This lapse of leadership is having an immense negative impact on our youth. Taken from Psalm 62, Dan has titled his sermon, Leaders and Losers. This psalm makes a stark comparison between leaders and losers, then challenges leaders to lead. During the pandemic, Psalm 62 came in at number 4 on the countdown of the top 10 songs in the Bible. This message was recorded during a live Sunday morning service at Community. Let's listen in as Dan begins.
You know, today, I've said this a couple of times, today's Palm Sunday, and as we prepare to go into the Passion Week and celebrate Easter on Sunday, our nation is reeling over what happened in Nashville last Monday at Covenant Christian School. The shootings and the senseless deaths of 6 innocent people. I thought, what do you do? What do you say? How do you address that as a church on a Sunday morning? And I think that what we need to do, we had communion where we remembered the Lord. I think it would be time for us to just stop for a moment, think about that church, that Christian school, and I want to remember these people by calling their names out and thinking about them. I want us to remember 9-year-old Evelyn Dykos, 9-year-old William Kinney, 9-year-old Hattie Scruggs, the pastor's daughter. I want us to remember Catherine Kuntz, the 60-year-old director of the school. I want us to remember Cynthia Peak, a substitute teacher that day. And I want us to remember Mike Hill, the custodian that gave his life that day. And I want to honor 2 his heroic leaders, Officers Rex Engelhardt and Michael Colazzo, who rushed in and took out the shooter within 14 minutes of the 911 call. What heroes. I just want to say thank you to those guys. And the shooter, what a loser. I know there's probably a lot of things that we don't know. When I got the call on Monday, when I got the news, and I was listening, when I got the news, I had 3 emotional responses: grief, anger, and immediate heightened security. I'm thinking about our preschool. I'm thinking about our church. I'm thinking about our Sunday school back in the back. And I immediately picked up the phone and called our director, and I said, have you heard the news? And she said, I have not. I said, well, let me tell you what the news is, and here's what we need to do. Of course, she was already doing all those things. I came in and I said, how about this? How about that? She said, we do that. We do this. In fact, we have. And what I want to tell you this morning as we think about things like that what we have done here at Community is that we have placed protocols of safety and security, and let me say it this way, and you know what I mean, protective proaction to deter such a thing as might happen here. And today, as we celebrate Easter, we are living in a nightmarish American culture that is impacting the lives of every one of us that are sitting here this morning. Amen. Nearly every aspect of our life. And especially this nightmarish culture is victimizing our children and our youth. The victims. It's our culture. Let me call this out. Our culture is victimizing the preborn with abortion. Those are victims. Our culture is victimizing the newborns with parental abandonment. Our culture is victimizing our youth with gender confusion, school endangerment, and educational failure. They're the victims. This horrible crisis has been brought on by nothing less than the abandonment of leadership across the board. We are experiencing this crisis because we are experiencing a vacuum of spiritual leadership in our churches, a vacuum of civic leadership in our communities, a vacuum of parental leadership in our homes, a vacuum of educational leadership in our schools, a vacuum of economic leadership in our financial institutions, and a vacuum of moral leadership in our government. As I witness our great country in a critical downward spiral, I've done something. I've acknowledged and confessed my own leadership failures and lapses. And I have committed to spend the rest of my life to address the leadership responsibilities that have been set before me as a pastor, as a parent, and I want to say as a patriot of this country. Amen. We all know we're in trouble. We know that. We all know that our culture is crumbling. We know that we are experiencing a leadership vacuum. I didn't have to call that out. We know it. But here's the question. Will we become leaders who will take on leadership responsibility, or losers who will merely whine and gripe and complain and continue to cower away from leadership responsibility that might cause us inconvenience in our lives? That is the question. You know, in ancient Israel, King David experienced a leadership lapse and failure that nearly destroyed his nation. He quit leading. Do you remember the story? In the spring, when kings would go out to battle, he said, I think I'll stay home. He quit leading. He had moral failure. He committed a criminal cover-up, and as the country spiraled out of control, it looked like it was all over for Israel. But he did something that very few people do. He picked himself up and returned to his leadership responsibility, and as he did this, the country recovered and became the greatest nation of that time, spreading the Israeli influence from the Euphrates River to the Nile, simply because a leader stood up and began to lead with integrity. And here's the lesson here, is that as we begin to see those leadership responsibilities and move into those responsibilities, other potential leaders will begin to follow us and take their place. And this is what happened. In fact, there's a whole chapter about all of the leaders that followed David and brought the country back around. And when that happened, David did something. The country recovered, and he wrote Psalm 62. And he gave it to Jeduthun, who was one of his 3 top worship leaders, and he released the song for the Jewish people to begin to sing. During the pandemic there in 2020, when leadership was at one of the lowest points in our country, Psalm 62 became the number 4 song in our countdown of the top 10 songs in the Bible. This song, when you read it, is about losers and leaders. And what it does is it gives us 3 descriptive things about losers and 3 descriptive things about leaders and that encourage us to take on our responsibility as leaders. So let's jump into the psalm and begin to look at it. First of all, this psalm teaches us about losers. And one of the first things that it teaches us is that losers loathe leaders. Let's read. Skip down to verse 3. Let's read verse 3 and part of verse 4 there. It says, this is David in the song writing, How long will you attack a man? They only consult to cast him down from his high position. I'm going to tell you something. Leadership's not fun. It's sacrificial. Because one of the hazards of leadership is that leaders are under constant attack because losers loathe leaders. They attack leaders. Satan loathes leaders. He hates leaders. And when someone moves into an area of leadership, Satan is going to make sure that his followers join in and attack leaders who are trying to lead people in the right direction. And when someone is under attack, don't dare say, well, he must have done something wrong. Understand that when someone is under attack, Satan is probably attacking him through someone else. And that person is probably a leader trying to do something for the glory of God. During David's administration as a leader, he was under constant attack by losers. He was under attack by King Saul, who started out pretty good but turned around and became a loser. He was attacked by giants who lost, by Philistines, by family members, and by political hacks. David refers to his enemies in the books of Psalms at least 106 times. Have you ever wondered about that? He's always said, my enemies are coming after me. My enemies, Lord, help me with my enemies. They were attacking him all the time because he was a dynamic leader during his time. So when someone is under attack, I would encourage you to pray for them because they're probably a leader. And so what this song does, it exposes the reality that leaders are going to always be under attack by losers. That's the way it goes. And when it happens, and it is important to remember that losers lose and leaders lead. Number 2, losers love lying. Look down at the second part of verse number 4 there. Talk about losers. They delight in lies. They bless with their mouth, but they curse inwardly. Some of the demarcations of a loser is that it indicates falsehoods. And by the way, I looked this up. What do you mean by lie? So I looked up in the Webster Merriam Dictionary, and by definition, liars or lies include falsehood, deception, made-up stories, and you're not going to believe this next definition. Fake news. It's right there in the dictionary. Go check me out. Trumped up charges and lies. So the question is, do we see any of that going on in our culture today? Recently, a few months ago, I actually preached through the book of 2 Thessalonians because 2 Thessalonians predicts 2,000 years ago, Paul wrote this book of 2 Thessalonians predicting the very time and period that we're living in right now, which is called the period of deception and delusion. That is our culture right now. Let me read one excerpt from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verses 9 through 10. Talking about just before the coming of the Antichrist, just before the rapture of the church, the coming of the lawless one, that be Antichrist, is according to the working of Satan. Satan's been planning this with all power and signs and lying wonders, and with all unrighteous deception among those who perish because they did not receive the love of the truth. We are in that period of time right now. Losers love lying. And what's tragic is that Is they're lying to our children about moral standards, about gender identity, about traditional marriage, about biblical truth, about economics. They're saying Marxism is better than capitalism. All around our country, liars are influencing our youth, whereas we need to be leading our youth. Do you see the problem that we're facing right now? As we've abandoned the leadership of our youth, they have stepped in and they are leading our youth in the wrong direction. Losers, low leaders. Losers love lying. And losers lie low. They live low. Look down at verse number 9. Surely men of low degree are a vapor. Men of high degree are a lie. If they are weighed on the scales, they are altogether lighter than vapor. What David is doing here is he's calling losers the lowest low life in the world. He said they're lighter than vapor. They're lower. His critique is brutal here. He calls them inadequate nothings. And then he warns us to not use the tactics of losers when dealing with other people. Look down in verse number 10. Do not trust in oppression, nor vainly hope in robbery. If riches increase, do not set your heart upon them. He's warning us, don't do what you see them do. In the song, his criticism and his condemnation is strong, very strong, because of the loathing, the lying, and the lowlife losers that are moving in and leading where we should be leading, ruining our youth and our country. But let me say something. There is hope. Right here, in fact, I've repeated this passage of Scripture many, many times because there's a song in the book of Judges that Deborah wrote, and the first line is the title of the song. And I just want to give that, I want to give that to you. This is one to memorize. This is one that I've memorized. In Judges chapter 5 and verse number 2, Deborah sings out, when leaders lead in Israel, when people willingly offer themselves for what? For leadership, bless the Lord. Things turn around. Countries revive. Today's crisis in America is due to a vacuum of leadership. There's no doubt about that. But we can turn this ship around, as did David, by simply returning to our responsibilities of leadership, leading our youth back to God, and this Song of David tells us how to do that. So the second part of the psalm is to leaders. So let's set up. Let's take note of how we ought to lead and bring our youth back to God. Number one, we're going to go all the way back to the beginning there. As leaders, we must lead them to the rock of salvation. I like that song you guys sang a while ago. That was right up my alley here. In verse number 1, it says, truly, David is writing, my soul silently waits for God. From him comes my salvation. He is my rock, my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not greatly be moved. The number one problem with today's America's youth is that they have no biblical foundation or no rock upon which to build their lives on. You remember the parable that Jesus talked about, building your lives on the rock or the sand? That's the problem. They do not know to build their lives upon the rock of salvation. So the very first order of business is that we must lead our youth to the rock of salvation. I want to tell you something. Satan is an evangelist, and he's got recruiters. He's put the recruiters throughout most of our institutions, and his recruiters are recruiting our youth to move away from God and toward the sand. Recently, I quoted to you in a sermon, and I've quoted it in my class there at Grace, that 85% of today's conversions happen with people that are from 4 years old to 14 years old. 85%. Another 10% up to 30 years old and 5% on beyond that. 85% of American conversions happen between the ages of 4 and 14. So as leaders, one of our top priorities must be the evangelization of our youth. I want to tell you something. That's why I personally have gone all in to move us into this building program, this youth building. I want us to evangelize our youth. I want us to have a place for them. I want us to have a place we can educate them. By the way, in our preschool, they get a Christian education. We had an Islamic lady come in and said, "Do you have to teach them about Jesus?" And the director said, "Yes, we do." And he said, and the person said, "Okay, go ahead." I mean, this is what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to evangelize children so that they can begin to build their lives on the rock of salvation. That's what we must be doing. And so we must focus on winning kids and grandkids to Christ. Number 2, as leaders, we must lead them to the rock of expectation. Look down in verse number 5. My soul waits silently for God alone, for my expectation is from Him. He only is my rock and my salvation. He is my defense. I shall not be moved. One of the great issues in today's American youth is the lack of purpose, mission, and vision. They don't know what to look forward to. They're just living their life on their devices. They're just going from one movement to another. And so what's happening is that the culture of our youth is crumbling. And as our youth see our culture crumbling, and as our young adults see our culture crumbling, they begin to lose hope. They begin to feel hopelessness. They begin to feel anxiety. And they go into depression. And it just deepens and they spiral because they see no future. They think we've messed it up. And they see nothing for them and they have no hope. And so what David is saying here is he's saying that that Jesus Christ is the rock of expectation. What does that mean? In Daniel chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. Do you remember what his dream was? It was a dream of kind of a superhero I call Metallic Man. Gold head, silver shoulders and chest, bronze torso, legs and feet made out of steel and ceramic. And I mean, and then this rock comes out of heaven and hits it on the feet and crumbles, and he wakes up. He can't remember his dream. And he says, somebody tell him a dream. Nobody can remember. Daniel says, I can tell you. Daniel comes in and says, here's what it is. He said, Metallica Man are the kings and the kingdoms of this world. You're number one. You're the gold guy. And after you's coming the silver guy, and after him's coming and he said, but I want to tell you something else. He goes to chapter 7 and he said, all of you guys are like animals. You're bad. You think you're good, but you're bad. And it's going to get worse and worse and worse until the rock of expectation comes down from heaven, hits these evil kingdoms in the feet, crumbles it, and out of that rock will grow a mountain that will fill the earth. He paints a picture of what's to come. Yes, the Lord said things will wax worse and worse. Yes, things are beginning to crumble. But Jesus and his kingdom are the rock of expectation. Do you realize that our kids know nothing about eschatology? They don't know about the coming of Christ. They don't know about the rapture. They don't know about the millennial kingdom. They don't know about ruling and reigning with Christ for 1,000 years. All they know is that everything's going bad. If we can capture our kids and our youth, if we can win them to Christ, and if we can start teaching them about the future and how they fit in the future, you know what's going to happen? Some of them are going to catch on fire, and they're going to be called to preach, and they're going to go into ministry. They'll be going up to Grace probably up here, if I can influence a little bit, you know. And then they will go out and become evangelists for the Lord Jesus Christ. But we've got to lead them to the rock of expectation. Christ is coming again. And we've got to return to the message of the imminent return of Christ. I think it's important to talk about our individual issues and things, but this pulpit is not for pop psychology. This pulpit is to proclaim the coming of Christ and the salvation of the lost. As leaders, we must lead our youth to the rock of salvation, to the rock of expectation, and then to the rock of fortification. Look down in verse number 7. In God is my salvation and my glory. The rock of my strength and my refuge is God. Truth in Him at all times. Trust in Him at all times, you people. Pour out your heart before Him. God is a refuge for us. David was a warrior. He was a giant killer. He was a conqueror. He defeated his enemies, both foreign and domestic. And here he gives glory to God for his strength, for his salvation, and for his security. For the emotional, psychological issues of our youth today that they're struggling with, depression, defeat, insecurity, fear, and anxiety are drowning them. Talk to them. They're anxious. They're depressed. They want to sleep all the time. As we become spiritual leaders who lead our youth to Christ, they will begin to gain a sense of security. They will believe and gain a sense of strength and fortitude and fortification in the Lord. They will begin to have a confidence that will be supernatural, and we must lead them in that direction. We must lead them to the rock of salvation, the rock of expectation, and the rock of fortification. How many of you remember the movie Forrest Gump? How many of you have seen the movie? Most of us here. If you haven't, I'm going to tell you, go home this afternoon and watch the movie. You know, it won't cost you anything. But you know, the movie came out in 1994. Forrest Gump was played by Tom Hanks. His mom, Sally Fields. Yeah, you know it. And Jennifer Williams, what's the girl's name? Jenny, Jenny was the third one there. So you know the story. Forrest had a low IQ, and he was picked on at school, and they discovered that he could run fast, and that was kind of a cool deal. And Jenny, his classroom mate, who was brought up in an abusive home, which we didn't know at the first part of the movie. She endeared Forrest and became his best friend. And she was in and out of his life throughout the whole movie, and he's going through all these things. But there's one scene in the movie that was particularly interesting. And that scene was where we really found out that she had been that her life was a wreck. And one of the reasons her life was a wreck is because she was raised in an abusive home, probably abused by her father. And so one day, Forrest and Jenny decide to go back and visit her home. And when they arrive, it's all torn down. You know, it's in shambles. It's a shack and everything. And she looks at it, and Forrest is looking at it, and she runs halfway up to the house. And you can tell she's upset, and she picks up a rock and throws it at the house. and just screams out and picks up another rock and throws it at the house. And another rock and another rock and another rock. And she looks around and she's used up all the rocks, and she just collapses and starts weeping uncontrollably. Forrest is way back down the trail, and he's watching all this, and he's trying to interpret it. And he walks up, and he sits down on the ground, and he says, well, in life, I guess there just ain't enough rocks. We think it's kind of funny, but there's a lesson here. You see, what happens to us when we get attacked, when we get abused, when we get hurt, when someone in church says something or does something that hurts us, we quit. We quit God. We quit we stepped into leadership and we got slapped down. I told you that's going to happen. You're going to get attacked. Just understand it, okay? But when that happens, normally we say that hurt. And we seed for years and years, and anger and bitterness builds into what we end up doing in our life is we look around and we pick up rocks and we start throwing the rocks. We throw them at our spouse. We throw them at God. We throw them at the pastor. We throw them at our friends. And we're just throwing rock after rock until we run out of rocks. And we're still bitter. We're still hurting. It doesn't do good to throw rocks. I've got a better idea. Here's a better idea. Why not go to the rock of our salvation, the rock of our expectation, the rock of our security and fortification? Why not go to the rock? Why not stand on the rock? Why not sense the victory of the rock of the ages? And once we have healing there, why not go get our kids and lead them to the rock? Isn't that a much better idea? I'm telling you, folks, we can change our church, we can change the community, and if enough of us begin to go to the rock of our salvation, our expectation, and our fortification, we could rescue this country. I don't know whether we'll do it or not, but we could do it if we begin to go to the rock.
On behalf of Pastor Dan and the folks at Community, thank you for joining us today at Community on Demand. Feel free to share this link with others, and please know you are always welcome to be our guest during a live service any Sunday morning at our campus in The Woodlands, Texas. For more information, just click on the link www.cbcwoodlands.org. I hope you will again join us at Community on Demand.